Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining the National Center for Education Statistics this morning for a public webinar in which NCES Study Director Julia Marlin will present an overview of the newest data on the teacher and principal attrition data from the Principal Follow-up Survey, the PFS, and the Teacher Follow-up Survey, the TFS. Both studies are part of the National Teacher and Principal Survey, or the NTPS, which was conducted during the 2021-22 school year. This collection will help us better understand how our nation's school leaders were affected by the coronavirus pandemic, since the NTPS was conducted during the first school year during the pandemic, and the PFS and TFS follow-up surveys occurred 1 year later when most schools had reopened to in-person learning. I'd like to start by thanking the school staff who generously shared their time and experiences by participating in the studies that we will be discussing today. More information on all three surveys, including the published reports of comprehensive findings, are available on our website. During the chat or during the webinar today, if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat. And if there's time at the end, we'll take as many of the questions as we can. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to introduce Julia Merlin, who's the study director for the Teacher Follow-up Survey and the Principal Follow-up Survey here at NCES.
Thank you very much, Andy. Good morning, everyone. As Andy said, my name is Julia Merlin, and today I'm going to share selected results from our recently released reports on principal and teacher attrition from the 2021-22 Principal Follow-up Survey and the 2021-22 Teacher Follow-up Survey. Here's a quick run of show for the presentation, starting with a little information about the National Teacher and Principal Survey. We will then pivot to walk through more detailed information about principal attrition and retention, followed by teacher attrition and retention, and close by reviewing the key findings from each of the follow-up surveys, as well as next steps. Before sharing more detailed findings, I want to first share information about the study that provided the data. The Principal Follow-up Survey, or PFS, and Teacher Follow-up Survey, or TFS, that we are discussing today are longitudinal components of the National Teacher and Principal Survey, the NTPS. For the PFS, 1 year later, we recontact principals who participated in the NTPS and ask them a single question about their current occupational status in order to better understand trends in attrition and retention. For the TFS, we recontact teachers 1 year later who had participated in the NTPS and ask them about their current occupational status, including asking former teachers why they left the classroom. For example, these PFS and TFS data were collected during the 2021-22 school year, and the NTPS was conducted in the 2020-21 school year. Contextually, I think it's important to keep in mind the uniqueness of these two school years as we review the findings. The 2020-21 NTPS was collected during the first school year during the coronavirus pandemic, while the 2021-22 PFS and TFS occurred during the first year that most schools had just reopened for in-person classes in some capacity. The NTPS collects data on K-12 schools from the perspectives of public and private school teachers and administrators, with emphasis on information that can only be obtained from teachers and principals themselves. We have published and continue to develop information from the 2020-21 NTPS on the characteristics of schools, principals, and teachers. We can provide links to that information if you're interested, and I believe it has already been put in the chat. We have conducted NTPS and its predecessor information program, known as the Schools and Staffing Survey, or SAS, every few years since 1987-88, meaning we have the ability to study trends over the past 35 years. The study is designed to be representative both nationally and for an extensive set of different school and educator characteristics. Some of the characteristics are listed here, but these are only representative of the detail that's available in the full data sets. Before sharing more detailed findings, I want to share information about the principal study that provided the data. The Principal Follow-up Survey, or the PFS, is conducted 1 school year later with all K-12 public and private school principals who had responded to the NTPS during the base year. The purpose of the PFS is to better understand attrition and retention among principals, including the percentage of principals who worked at the same school in both the 2021-22 and 2020-21 school years, or stayers, the principals who had moved to lead a different school since the NTPS base year, or movers, and the principals who had left the profession altogether, or leavers. For our 2021-22 collection, we included all public and private school principals who had responded to the 2020-21 NTPS. This included about 6,500 public school and about 1,800 private school principals. Since the PFS is a continuation of the NTPS, it is designed to be representative of different principal and school characteristics based on what principals reported on the NTPS. In this report, we include national estimates, estimates for public and private school principals, estimates by different school characteristics and by principal characteristics, such as age, race or ethnicity, years of experience in the field, and salary. Notably, information provided by principals on key topics during the NTPS can also be used to better understand attrition and retention, such as a principal's job satisfaction, goals, working hours, and perceptions of influence during the base year survey. Now I'd like to present some information about trends in principal attrition. During the most recent collection, we learned that 11.2% of public school and 9.7% of private school principals were leavers or left the profession between the 2020-21 and 2021-22 school years. 5.9% of public and 2.5% of private school principals were movers or moved to lead a different school. And 79.6% of public school and 82.6% of private school principals were stayers or stayed principal at the same school during the following school year. For the remainder of the presentation today, I'm going to focus on public school principals, but the PFS report contains analogous data for private school principals as well. When looking at trends, we can get a bigger picture of attrition and turnover in the field over time. In the graph on the slide, you'll see asterisks that represent if the percentage of 21-22 principal stayers, movers, or leavers is significantly different than previous collection years, and arrows that show if each respective collection is statistically different than the previous collection that occurred right before it. What we learn is that while there is a statistically different increase in attrition since the last PFS 5 years ago, there isn't a statistically different rise in attrition over time. The 11.2% of public school leavers who left the profession between 2020-21 and 21-22 is significantly higher than the 9.8% of public school principals who left the profession between 2015-16 and 2016-17. But if you look at the arrows, we also see a decrease in the percentage of principals who were leavers when comparing the rates during the 2012-13 and 2016-17 collections. And neither the 2008-9 nor the 2012-13 rates are different from the 11.2% found in 2021-22. Next, I'd like to present information about the principal workforce in 2020-21. When we look more closely by different principal workforce characteristics, findings show that a higher percentage of experienced public school principals left the profession than inexperienced or newer principals. 14.7% of public school principals with 10 or more years of experience as a principal, and 11.1% with 3 to 9 years of experience left the profession by 2021-22, compared to 7.6% of principals with less than 3 years of experience. We saw this same pattern in which more experienced principals left at a higher rate than newer principals over multiple school years, meaning that this isn't a pattern of attrition that's unique to 2021-22. There isn't, in fact, a statistical difference in attrition among the most experienced principals compared to 21-22, except for the first PFS collection in 2008-9, 15 years earlier, when 18.2% of principals with 10 years or more of experience left the field compared to 14.7%. Principal attrition also differed by age. 19.9% of older public school principals who were 55 years old or more left the profession between 2020-21 and 2021-22, compared to the 9.2% who were 45 to 54 years old, and the 8% of the youngest principals are those who were less than 45 years old. Again, this pattern, while notable, isn't unique to 2021-22 and differs similarly during earlier PFS cycles. In 2008-9, 2012-13, and 2016-17, the oldest principals are those who are 55 years or more, left at a higher rate than both principals who are 45 to 54 years old and the youngest principals. There also isn't a statistical difference in attrition by age when looking at how the 2008-9 and 2012-13 cycles differ from 2021-22. But we do see an increase in attrition amongst the youngest principals between the 2016-17 and the 2021-22 surveys. 8% of the youngest principals were leavers between the 2020-21 and 2021-22 school years, which was higher than the 6.2% 5 years earlier. Now I'd like to present information about the characteristics of the schools where principals worked in 2020-21. Schools with more students of color enrolled, whether these students were 75% or more, or 50 to 74% of the student body, saw more principals leave their schools than did schools with less than 25% student of color enrollment. In schools where 75% or more of enrolled students were students of color, 7.1% of public schools had principals move to a different school, which is significantly higher than the 4.6% of principals who moved from schools with less than 25% student of color enrollment. Similarly, 6.8% of public school principals at schools with 50 to 74% student of color enrollment were movers, or went to lead a different school, compared to 4.6% in those less than 25% enrollment schools. However, there was no difference in whether principals at schools with 75% or more, or 50 to 74% student of color enrollment left the profession altogether. This means that schools with the highest percentage of students of color saw more turnover in leadership between 2020-21 and 21-22 school years than did schools with the lowest percentage of student of color enrollment. And subsequently means they were dealing with the challenges of finding and hiring a new principal for the next school year. This map on the screen shows the percentage of public school principals who left the profession in different regions across the country. Nationally, this attrition rate for public school principals is 11.2%. And the percentage ranged from 9.6% in the Northeast to 12% in the South. Lastly, I'd like to present information about principal working conditions as reported by principals themselves on the 2020-21 NTPS. On the NTPS, principals answered a series of items about job satisfaction. In this report, we looked at how these responses relate to attrition and turnover 1 school year later. Of public school principals who strongly or somewhat agreed with the statement, I don't seem to have as much enthusiasm now as I did when I began this job. 15.9% left the profession by the 2021-22 school year. Among the public school principals who strongly or somewhat agreed with the statement, I am generally satisfied with being a principal in this school. 10.6% were leavers during the PFS year. Of public school principals who strongly or somewhat agreed with the statement, I think about transferring to another school. 11.6% did move to another school by the 2021-22 school year. And among the public school principals who strongly or somewhat agreed with the statement, I am generally satisfied with being principal in this school. 5.7% were movers during the PFS year. Now that we've talked about the principal data, I'm going to discuss the comparable teacher follow-up survey and its findings. But beforehand, I want to first share information about the study that provided the data. The teacher follow-up survey, or the TFS, is conducted 1 school year later with K-12 public and private school teachers who had responded to the NTPS during the base year. We sought information from a sample of about 10,000 public and private school teachers, with teachers categorized as shown here in terms of career experiences over the 2-year period. They're categorized the same way as they were for the principal follow-up survey, although notably for teachers and for their positions in their classrooms. Stayers are those teachers who continue teaching in the same school across the 2020-21 and 2021-22 school years. Movers are teachers who continue teaching over the 2 school years, but who had changed schools between 2020-21 and 2021-22. And leavers are teachers who left the profession altogether between the 2 school years. Since the TFS is a continuation of the NTPS, it is designed to be representative of different teacher and school characteristics, so we can better understand how attrition differs for different subgroups of teachers. Notably, information provided by schools, principals, or teachers on key topics during the NTPS can also be used to better understand attrition and retention, such as teachers' job satisfaction, base teaching salary, and hours worked. So what did we see in terms of trends in teacher attrition? During the most recent collection, we learned that 8% of public school and 12% of private school teachers were leavers or left the profession between the 2020-21 and 2021-22 school years. 8% of public and 6% of private school teachers were movers or moved to teach in a different school. And 84% of public and 82% of private school teachers were stayers or stayed a teacher at the same school during the following school year. For the remainder of the presentation today, I'm going to focus on public school teachers, but the TFS report contains analogous data for private school teachers as well. When looking at trends, we can get a bigger picture of attrition and turnover in the field over time. In the graph on the slide, you'll see asterisks that represent if the percentage of 2021-22 teacher stayers, movers, or leavers is significantly different than the previous collection year, and arrows that show if each respective collection is statistically different than the previous collection that occurred right before it. What we see is that there is neither a statistically different increase in attrition since the last TFS 9 years ago, nor is there a statistically different rise in attrition over time among public school teachers. There are significant differences between the 8% of leavers in 21-22 and the 7, 5, or 6% of leavers in 1994-95, 1991-92, and 1988-89 respectively. But this trend is not present in the more recent collections in the 2000s. Next, I'd like to present information about attrition based on characteristics of public school teachers. When we consider different teacher characteristics, the data show that public school teachers with less than 10 years of experience move to teach at different schools at rates that were higher than seen for teachers with 10 or more years of experience. For example, 13% of public school teachers with 3 years or less teaching experience move schools, compared to 6% of teachers with at least 15 years of experience. We did not see a similar relationship between experience and leaving teaching, shown on the right of the slide here in yellow. Though not shown here, we see a similar relationship in data from a decade earlier. Teacher attrition also differed by age. A higher percentage of public school teachers who were younger than 30 moved to different schools, but a higher percentage of the oldest teachers left the profession altogether. In terms of moving, for example, 14% of public school teachers who were less than 30 years old moved to different schools, compared to 5% of the oldest teachers, or those who were 55 years or older. Looking to this graph on the left, we see that 16% of teachers who were 55 years or older left teaching, compared with 7% of teachers who were less than 30. Trends show a similar pattern among older public school teacher movers and leavers in 2012-13, which was the previous collection year for this survey before the 21-22, indicating that this is not a statistically significant difference in a pattern that sustained over time. Data also show that the lowest paid public school teachers, or those earning a base teaching salary less than $40,000, left the profession at a higher rate than teachers with mid-range base teaching salaries. 11% of the lowest paid teachers left the profession, compared to 7% of teachers who earned $40,000 to $54,999, and 7% of those who earned $55,000 to $69,999. We have not yet produced multivariate analyses that look at how experience, age, and salaries interact with decisions to stay, move, or leave, but hope to do so soon. As noted at the outset, NTPS and related TFS information on attrition can also be developed by state. When we look at how the public school mover rate differs across all 50 states in the district, we see quite a range from 3% in Pennsylvania to 14% in Texas. We've structured the state information in terms of quintiles and mover rates, with shades of green getting darker as you move up the quintile groupings. Because of sample sizes, we cannot develop stable estimates for the states that are shown in the darker gray on the slide. Shifting to information about public school leavers by state, we see a range of rates from 4% in Wisconsin to 11% in Massachusetts. Again, we organize the information by quintiles, with the shading getting darker as you move from lowest to highest quintile. Lastly, I'd like to present information on teachers' most important reasons for leaving the profession and experiences in new employment pathways. On the TFS, teachers who left the profession voluntarily were given a long list of possible reasons that may have affected their decision to leave the teaching profession, including some personal and some professional reasons, and they were asked to rate each of them. Then teachers were asked to select one reason as their most important reason for leaving the field. These results represent 96% of all leavers. Here we see a selected group of most important reasons, and the rest are available in the report upon which this presentation is based. We see that 17% of public and 13% of private school teachers left in order to retire, and 9% of public and 11% of private school teachers rated needing or wanting a higher salary as their most important reason. Somewhat surprisingly, we see a large gap between public and private school teachers who reported leaving teaching for personal life reasons as their most important reason. 13% of public school teachers who left selected this reason, compared to 24% of private school teachers who left teaching. Public school teachers who left teaching left for other jobs in schools at a higher rate than private school teachers who left teaching. And that's shown at the top of this graphic. Please note that TFS defines occupation as the kind of work a person does to earn a living, while industry, which we'll discuss on the next slide, is the type of activity at a person's place of work. None of the other public and private school teacher leaver comparisons resulted in differences once margins of error are accounted for in the estimates. Within these occupations, as noted, we also see differences in the kinds of industry that public and private school teachers participate in after leaving the profession. While most public and private school teachers moved into private industry, private school leavers did so at a much higher rate. And at the bottom of the chart, we see that teachers leaving public schools went into government positions at a higher rate than those who left private schools. Former teachers who had new jobs in 2021-22 also rated different aspects of their current occupation compared to teaching. To call out a few notable examples, 66% of leavers said that their ability to balance personal life and work is better in their current position than it was in teaching. 60% said their autonomy and control over their own work is better in their current position than it was in teaching. And 58% said professional prestige is better in their current position than it was in teaching. This is a selected list of aspects that all leavers rated as better in their current position that's been truncated here on the slide. None of the other factors were reported as better in their current position compared to teaching by over 58% of teachers. And at the other end, benefits reported as better in the current job by 20% of leavers. The full list is available in the TFS report. And as noted, there were no aspects in which leavers rated as being better in teaching than better in their current position. I've shared a lot of numbers with you today, and I want to conclude by reiterating some of the highlights and key findings from both the PFS and the TFS. In summary, for the PFS, we found that 11.2% of public school principals left the profession between 2020-21 and 2021-22, which is significantly higher than the 9.8% of public school principals who left the profession between 2015-16 and 2016-17, which was the last collection cycle for this survey. But it is not significantly higher than the attrition rate in previous PFS cycles. We learned that the oldest and most experienced principals are leaving the profession at higher rates than the youngest or the newest principals. This trend is not unique to 21-22, but instead helps to highlight a similar story across all PFS cycles. Compared to public schools, where less than 25% of enrolled students are students of color, where 4.6% of principals moved to lead other schools, the schools with 75% or more enrollment lost more principals at 7.1%. And turnover overall, both when leaving the profession or just leaving the prior year's school, was higher among principals who self-reported having lower job satisfaction during NTPS the year before. Some of the key takeaways from the teacher follow-up survey report are also shown here. Looking over the last decade or so, we see that the 2021-22 rate of teachers leaving teaching at 8% is not significantly different from what we saw in 2012-13. The rate of public school teachers leaving teaching in 2021-22 varied considerably by state. It also varied considerably for those who were staying in the classroom but moving to different schools. Of those leaving the profession in 2021-22, 13% did so because of personal life reasons. And 66% of those who left for new careers report work-life balance is better in their new jobs than compared to teaching. Now, to conclude, I'll share the next steps for other related data for the NTPS, the PFS, and the TFS. We have a few other exciting release findings on the horizon, including the TFS state estimates that I previewed today and supplemental NTPS tables and reports on relevant topics such as teachers out-of-pocket spending and student loans. We're currently also in the field for the 2023-24 NTPS, and the 2024-25 PFS and TFS are upcoming. These are important collections that will enrich our trends data as we continue to try and understand the condition of education before, during, and in this nebulous after pandemic stage in our schools. Thank you all very much for your time. I appreciate being able to talk with you today and share these selected findings, and I look forward to your questions.